The next part of this is, what do we mean by dependencies in terms of how do we refer to people we're dependent on and people who are dependent upon us? Well, I like to use the kind of terms of upstream and downstream dependencies. So essentially, we've got a blocker on that ticket. We hand off to a shared service team. They need to then do some work, but of course it sits in their backlog until they're ready to service our request. Now that team starts work on something. They then become dependent maybe on a component team, right? And these are downstream teams that are becoming that we've got dependencies on. This team works on servicing that demand. They resolve that dependency, which then enables that ticket to then continue moving across the Kanban board. Now think about the amount of time that would be kind of incurred here, waiting time while it's sat in these downstream teams backlogs. Okay, so they sat around waiting until they've got the capacity to deal with it. All right. Once they've then resolved that, of course, that goes through their board, they complete the dependency, gets passed up to the feature team, and finally the feature team can then continue along with moving that feature forwards. So you can see, even with just 2 levels of dependencies, it could be really unpredictable as to when are we going to get our feature actually unblocked and the way we can move it across. Okay. So again, we kind of look downstream and we also then look upstream as well. I guess a couple of rules on this is the team furthest upstream should own the entire dependency chain, because what you find is the teams who are downstream, so if you're down here at this bottom section, you're so busy in your own world with your own demand, and it's just more demand appearing as far as the dependency goes. So it's really hard to look upstream to really understand the impact of dependencies that you're having on the dependency chain. So again, it's whoever is upstream, they manage everything downstream from that point on in terms of dependencies. All right. There is you'll see we've got some histograms here, some cycle time histograms. So it's really critical that that every team really publishes their cycle time so other teams can see how predictable they are. Because in this last example here, because they've got a short tail, you can be, there's a good chance that they're going to get that dependency resolved pretty quickly. Whereas this team, the confidence level is less because they've got a long tail. It could be many weeks or months before they actually get around to resolving the dependency. So again, having that downstream insight as to how teams are performing, again, is really critical. Now, I'm talking here about an organization who's really mature in terms of Kanban and practices around this sort of data, being able to, publish that data, being open about publishing that data. We don't want to air our dirty washing in public. So again, it's really about making that transparent. Comes with a lot of baggage potentially. Right, next one. It's the fact that this kind of dependencies everywhere, really. The concept that even when you've got stuff in your backlog, maybe it's got to be run via a technical design authority or some other process to approve it. Maybe once it's in development, we need to hand off to an API team who are then going to also then have dependencies on further component teams, such as an SAP team, CRM team, who knows, could be anything. Maybe once it gets to the demo stage, we're demoing to legal and they need to go off and do a load of, review and approval. IT operations, how are we going to get this into live? Maybe they hand off to a release team who hands off to a DBA team. Also, there's a firewall team. So you can imagine these they're everywhere dependencies, and teams are regularly sort of blocked. Well, ultimately, this is about how quick can we get value delivered to our end users. In other words, put in the live environment. I think anybody who's experienced with Kanban recognizes that actually most organizations are a network of interconnected services, okay, and interdependent. So as a user need comes in on the left there, it goes through a whole bunch of teams and it comes out on the right as a need that's been addressed, okay. And this is even more so in this kind of day and age. And, you know, as we start to break up our monolithic architectures and we start to have distributed teams, particularly now we're in the era of COVID and remote working, there's lots of handoffs everywhere, okay. So if we've got so many dependencies, there's generally two approaches you could use. You could break the dependency, and I think that's definitely the preference. If we can break it, break the dependency. You may need to evolve your architecture and your whole platform to accommodate that, but it's not always desirable to break dependencies because of the specialisms that we spoke about before. It's often really hard to break dependencies because you've got people who maybe have a vested interest in being a siloed team. You know, office politics come into play a lot here. You've got people who are empire building. We've got these monolithic architectures. We've got legacy technology that we're dealing with as well. So to break the dependency, it's often hard. It's hard work. If you can do it, great, massive reward if you do that. But it's just to be aware of some of the challenges to breaking those dependencies. So the only thing that's remaining, if you can't break the dependency, is to reduce the impact of that dependency on your flow across your boards, okay? We all recognize that we want things to move across the board as efficiently as possible. So yeah, it's just making sure we do that. Right. So there's the base concepts that we're going to start with. Thinking about cycle time, understanding teams and the structure of teams and the relationships between teams, understanding the taxonomy of dependency management and what it really means. And then this idea of handoffs and upstream and downstream and network of interconnected services.